In the Xiangxi area, there are many mysterious legends, and today's story takes place here. 5 summers ago, a high school sophomore went out during the summer vacation and was preparing to go home for breakfast in the morning. Upon returning home, he found many people in the house, most of whom were relatives rarely seen in normal times, only gathering together during the new year. Everyone was solemn, and only the student stood there at a loss. Finally, he grabbed a cousin to ask and found out that his grandmother was missing and had been gone for 2 nights and a day. He said he was taking a walk, slowly walking along the stream, when suddenly his grandmother disappeared. The towns within a radius of several kilometers, the banks of the stream, had all been searched, but there was no sign of the grandmother. At that time, he was very surprised. The grandmother was already in her 90s, and she had spent 2 nights in the mountains, which most people could hardly believe. But no matter what, people had to find her. The whole family gathered a few people from the village and went to search in the mountains separately. The student also hastily ate a few mouthfuls of lunch and followed them up the mountain. Growing up in the mountains and rivers, climbing mountains and crossing rivers is a common occurrence. As a result, this group of people searched until 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, and it was already too dark to see the road, but still found nothing, so they all went down the mountain one after another. The student was just a half-grown child at the time, tired for a day, simply washed up and went to sleep, thinking of continuing the search the next day. Then the noise downstairs woke him up the next morning. When he went downstairs, he found that his grandfather had invited an old man who was using his grandmother's private clothes for positioning, waiting for him to come downstairs. The old man pointed out the direction, saying it was behind a certain reservoir in the southwest direction. After hearing this, everyone did not believe it, because the reservoir was more than 10 kilometers away from the village, and it was necessary to cross 4 mountains. How could a 90-year-old person walk so far? But the old man said nothing, just glanced around at everyone, and finally took a look at the student, saying that the way to break the situation was on him. For everyone, this was just a perfunctory affair. They let the student go in that direction with his aunt, and the others continued to go into the mountains separately. After hearing the old man's words, although the student did not understand the reason, he felt that what the old man said was very reliable. Later, the old man sent them to the foot of the mountain behind the reservoir, tied a red rope to the pulse of the aunt's right hand, let the student take off his clothes, and drew a portrait of a god on his back. The old man told him that he must walk along the path of the herbalist, go straight to the top of the mountain, and not go into the forest. If he took the wrong road, he would never come back. Moreover, after passing a certain place, he must turn back immediately, whether he found it or not, otherwise he would never be able to come back. At that time, the student looked at the sun above his head, thinking about the afternoon 2 or 3 o'clock, how could it take so long to find it? But he still agreed wholeheartedly. He took his aunt up the mountain, feeling that he had only climbed halfway, and the position that should have been reached in an hour. It was dark, took out his mobile phone and looked, it was already 9 o'clock, and the mobile phone had no signal. He broke out in a cold sweat, but still decided to continue. They didn't know how long they had been climbing in the forest. Suddenly, the student's hair stood up because he saw a figure sitting on the road ahead. He gently held his aunt behind him and slowly shone the mobile phone light forward. Strangely, the portrait on his back suddenly started to heat up, as if he had painted a hot towel on his back. When the light illuminated the figure, they found that it was the grandmother who had been missing for 3 or 2 days, but her expression was a bit wrong, showing a bit of a sharp mouth and cheeky face. The aunt also saw it, and she was excited to shout, but was stopped by the student. He looked carefully at the grandmother's posture and face, and was sure that the grandmother was definitely not herself. He gritted his teeth and shouted again. This time, the grandmother answered, but the voice was a young woman's voice. The aunt was already in tears, but she still shivered and bit her lips, not daring to make a sound. The student did not know where his courage came from. He used the pain of the burn on his back and shouted loudly, and then the grandmother's eyes immediately cooled down, but there was a trace of malice, just staring at his eyes, and then closed her eyes and immediately fell to the ground. This time, the heat on the student's back slowly disappeared. He breathed a sigh of relief and looked at his aunt beside him. At this time, the aunt reacted, regardless of fear, ran to help the grandmother. He also went over to have a look and found that the grandmother was in good condition except for being a bit haggard. He took out his mobile phone and found that it was already 12:30, and there was a signal. He quickly took off his school uniform and tied the grandmother on his back, then called his father. Later, his uncle and cousin came to pick them up. Fortunately, there were no big problems behind the grandmother. As for what happened to the grandmother, she said she was walking, her eyes went black, and when she opened her eyes again, she was already lying at home. Well, see you next story.